Hey Lake Point, Pastor Michael here to get you caught up on the final week of our series, The Upside Down Kingdom. This week we explored how Jesus makes the claim that you, as one of his followers, are the salt of the earth. And it's a statement on both your identity and your purpose. See, after teaching the Beatitudes, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13 that you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. And so let's break down what Jesus is teaching word by word because they all carry some pretty heavy significance. First up, you are the salt of the earth. Now when he says you, yes, he's referring to you as an individual, but he's also referring to all disciples of Jesus throughout history and our collective purpose and identity. Jesus wants us to envision what believers can accomplish when we work together. The next word we need to unpack from that phrase is you are the salt of the earth. Jesus is not giving a command, but he's revealing our identity. We are not told we could be or should be salt, but we are together. We are salt. Jesus wants you to know who you are well before he's going to tell you what to do. You don't have to work to become salt. When you're a disciple of Jesus, you are salt. Next up, the salt part. What does it mean to be salt? Well, over the centuries, salt has had a multitude of uses. It does a lot of different things, which means it has a lot of different metaphorical associations. In fact, biblical scholars W.D. Davies and Dale Allison assert that there are 11 serious contenders for what Jesus had in mind. So really quickly, here they are, and it could be that Jesus was speaking about how valuable we are. You see, salt was a uniquely valuable commodity in ancient Rome. Soldiers were often paid in salt, known as a salarium. It's where we get our modern English word salary. Now, what made salt so valuable? Several things, and those things are the next few potential meanings Jesus could have had in mind. You see, for ancient people, salt was their primary seasoning for food. Much like it does ours, it enhanced the meals they consumed. What's more is it was a preservative for meat. It was necessary to keep meat from spoiling. Also, in the ancient world, salt was used as a disinfectant in wounds, and it became a symbol of healing. Plus, undrinkable water was found to be purified with salt, meaning that salt could be seen as a symbol of purity. In the ancient world, salt could also be used as fertilizer when sprinkled lightly over the ground or mixed with manure. Some translators actually argue in favor of you are the salt of the soil to emphasize salt's role as a fertilizer that helps living things grow. At the same time, heavier doses of salt were used to destroy the land of an enemy. I mean, maybe there's something there. Jesus and the other biblical authors talk frequently about taking back the territory from the spiritual forces of darkness that are plaguing our world. Perhaps Jesus is saying that the presence of his followers is his plan for destroying the strongholds of evil. Salt was also a symbol of God's judgment. You can read the story of Lot and his wife in your Old Testament. In their judgment, she is turned into a pillar of salt. Another meaning that Jesus could have had in mind was how salt was used in ancient covenant ceremonies. Salt was eaten by itself or with bread to commit to a covenantal agreement. And since salt was their primary preservative, salt became a symbol of someone's lasting loyalty towards a covenant. Or perhaps Jesus was thinking about how salt was sprinkled over the meat of a sacrifice. Because by the time we get to the end of Matthew's gospel, we see that Jesus has come to establish a new covenant by becoming the last sacrifice. And so maybe he's communicating that disciples of Jesus are his new covenant ambassadors, or as Paul describes us, a living sacrifice who are meant to live countercultural lives that point to Jesus. So which of the metaphors was Jesus alluding to? I'd wager probably all of them to some extent, which is why I think this teaching is so potent. It has so much to say about our identity and purpose, so much to say about who we are, what we're called to do, and how we're called to live. Now, continue on. The next thing I want to kind of highlight for you is in the phrase is that you are the salt of the earth. Jesus doesn't just tell his listeners you're the salt of Galilee or Israel, but he tells them, and subsequently us, that we are the salt of the whole earth. Our purpose is to salt all corners of the globe. We are not only of the earth, we are for the earth. We are here to be part of redeeming and restoring and reconciling. Unfortunately, a lot of Christian teaching seems to center around abandoning or fleeing and sometimes even despising the earth and its inhabitants. But let me say that again. Jesus is clear. We are of the earth and we are for the earth. Our purpose is to live salty lifestyles so that the earth will benefit. All right, we dealt with the pleasant part. However, there's more to Jesus' teaching than just you are the salt of the earth. He also gives us a warning. He says, but the salt loses its saltiness. If it becomes dull, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. What Jesus is saying is that disciples whose saltiness has faded, who pursue justice without mercy and judgment without grace, are making fools of themselves. Now, for any chemistry buffs listening to this, as you know, chemically salt is sodium chloride, and sodium chloride is a stable compound that will always taste salty, which means technically pure salt cannot lose its saltiness. So on that note, two things to keep in mind. First, Jesus is giving a lesson in discipleship, not chemistry. As we've been exploring, he is using a hypothetical metaphor to make a point about identity and purpose. Secondly, in Jesus' day, salt could seem to lose its saltiness to the degree that other elements were mixed in. If other things got mixed into the salt supply, if there were impurities, it could dilute the taste of salt. And therein lies a powerful lesson for disciples both then and now, and it's this. If the church allows other elements that are not reflective of the Beatitudes to become normative among us, we're going to lose our saltiness and usefulness to the world around us. Said another way, when the church takes on the vision and values of the surrounding culture and we drift or else we drift into legalism, we lose our reason for being. So with all that in mind, here's a few observations about salt that I shared that I believe have great implications for us as a church. First, salt only makes a difference when it gets out of the salt shaker. Salt only makes a difference when it actually touches the food it's meant to season or preserve. Salt that is 1 centimeter away from food is as useless as salt still in the salt shaker, meaning we need to be involved. Here at Lake Point, we believe we've been blessed to be a blessing. It's hard to be a blessing if you're not part of the community snapshot. If you're not praying for, praying with, listening to, eating alongside, serving those who do not know Jesus as the Lord and leader, you're simply salt stuck in the salt shaker. Salt needs to be out of the salt shaker to have any effect. In writing about the disciples, Amy Jill Levine writes that their very presence was a blessing. Don't you want people to feel blessed whenever you're around? I mean, what a beautiful goal. People more often than not should feel blessed by our presence. And beyond that, our community should feel blessed by the presence of our church. So much so that they should notice and grieve were Lake Point to shut its doors one day. Far too often, churches close down and the community that they're in has no idea. That's a tragedy. Salt is meant to be out of the salt shaker. Our presence is meant to be a blessing. Second, salt is salty. Profound, I know. My point is this: salt doesn't have to try to be what it already is. We are the salt of the earth. We need to know our identity and then live it out. Now, my wife has a couple good friends who she was having supper with a few months ago, and during their dinner, they started talking about religion and why they believe they should do good things. The ladies were saying they believed in karma, and Melissa was telling them that, well, she didn't. And so one of the ladies started asking, well, don't you just do good things so that God will approve of you? Or don't you just do good things so that good things will happen to you? And Melissa had a beautiful response. She said, no, I do good things because that's who I am. That's who I was made to be. What a brilliant perspective on sin. Sin is a betrayal of your God-given identity. Salt is salty. My wife knows who she was created to be, and so her actions are an outpouring of what God says she is. Now, to clarify, this isn't me saying we don't get it wrong. This isn't to say Christians never sin. There is no promise that on this side of eternity you will be sinless, but I do believe when you know your true identity, you will inherently sin less. Okay, third, salt enhances what is already good about a flavor without completely changing or overpowering it. Salt helps food become a better version of itself. Salt brings out the best of what's already there. Art, science, medicine, music, family, friendships. We enhance, we don't reinvent. Fourth, salt works together. A single grain of salt will not make much of a difference in a dish. And you should feel no pressure to change the world all by yourself. But together, as we each do our small and seemingly insignificant part, as we remain faithful in whatever spheres of influence and responsibility we have, there's an accumulative effect that takes place. Salt works together, and a single grain is always going to have a limited impact. Now, finally, perhaps most important for us as a church to hear, salt increases thirst. Now, here's the good news. Jesus offers living water. Jesus uses this phrase a couple of times in the Gospels. In John chapter 4, Jesus and his disciples had traveled into Samaria, and Jesus was tired, and so he sits down at a well, and he sends his disciples into a nearby town to buy food. And so while Jesus is sitting at this well, a Samaritan woman comes to draw water, and Jesus asks her for a drink. The Samaritan woman is quite shocked because Jesus was a Jew, and Jews and Samaritans had this long history of mutual animosity, and so she naturally asked him why he was even speaking to her in the first place. However, Jesus ignores the question. He gets right to the point. This is what he says. He says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asked you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. The reality is, people should see our lives and desire more of the thirst-quenching, life-giving spirit that animates, invigorates, and enlivens our church community. Your presence, our presence in our homes, our neighborhoods, our workplaces, our cities, our country, and our world should make people thirst for more of God's goodness in their lives. And so the question is, are people getting thirsty for more of God whenever you're around? Because they should be. Well, thanks for listening. Enjoy jumping in discussion questions. I'll see you next time.